The rain fell steadily over Buckingham Palace, tapping softly against the tall windows of the king's private study. Inside the grand room, King Charles III stood near the fireplace, reading a document that had just been delivered. His expression was serious, very serious. Across the room, a senior royal advisor waited quietly. Is it confirmed, Your Majesty? The advisor asked carefully. Charles lowered the document. Yes, he said slowly. The total amount is $59 million. dollars. The room fell silent. It was a staggering figure, and the name attached to it made the situation even more complicated. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. The document Charles held was a detailed financial summary sent from advisors in the United States. For years, Harry and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, had built an independent life in California. They had signed business deals, production contracts, media partnerships, luxury property investments. But according to the report now in Charles's hands, several of those ventures had collapsed at the same time. A failed investment partnership, a canceled streaming contract, unexpected legal expenses, and the mortgage tied to their massive home near Montecito. Together, the liabilities had snowballed into an overwhelming figure, $59 million. dollars. The advisor spoke again. There was an attempt to restructure the debt. Charles nodded. I see that. He turned another page, but it appears assets were liquidated. The advisor hesitated before answering. Yes, Your Majesty. Months earlier, Meghan had made a bold and controversial decision. As financial pressure mounted, she had ordered the sale of several assets tied to their business empire: investment accounts, luxury vehicles, designer collections, several high value real estate holdings connected to their media ventures. The intention had been simple: reduce exposure, cut losses, but the liquidation had not covered everything. In fact, it had created another problem because many of the financial agreements had been signed jointly, but some were signed only by Harry, meaning the remaining debt legally fell on him. Charles sat heavily in his chair. Despite everything that had happened between father and son over the past few years, Harry was still his child, still his responsibility in some way, but there was another reality. The monarchy could not be seen bailing out personal financial problems, not after everything that had already happened publicly. The advisor cleared his throat. There has been a request for assistance. Charles closed his eyes briefly. I assumed there would be. The official request had arrived earlier that morning. Harry had written directly to his father, not as a royal, but as a son. In the letter, he explained the situation: the collapsed deals, the mounting debt, the desperate attempts to recover financially, and finally, the request: support from the royal family to settle the remaining balance. Charles read the final line of the letter again. I have nowhere else to turn. Later that afternoon, Prince William arrived at Buckingham Palace after receiving a request to meet his father. When Charles explained the situation, William listened carefully. 59 million? William repeated. Charles nodded. That's the outstanding liability. William sat back in his chair. That's enormous. Charles spoke calmly. Yes, but the greater issue is what helping would mean? William understood immediately. Public perception, royal finances, political scrutiny, any financial rescue would spark intense controversy. Charles stood and walked slowly toward the window. Rain still poured across the palace courtyard. I love Harry, he said quietly. William remained silent. But the monarchy cannot function as a personal safety net, Charles continued. He turned back toward his son. If we intervene now, it will never end. William nodded slowly. So what will you do? Charles picked up the letter from his desk. I will return the request. William raised an eyebrow. Return it? Charles nodded. Yes, with a message. The response from Buckingham Palace was carefully written, respectful but firm. Charles expressed sympathy for Harry's situation, but he also made something clear: the financial obligations were personal, and they must be resolved personally. The monarchy would not intervene. Attached to the response was the original request: returned unpaid. Across the Atlantic in Montecito, Harry sat at a large wooden desk inside the quiet home he had once hoped would symbolize a new beginning. The envelope from Buckingham Palace lay open before him. He had already read the letter twice, and the meaning was unmistakable. The palace would not help. The debt was his responsibility alone. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. For the first time in years, Harry felt something he hadn't expected: isolation. Megan entered the room quietly. You heard back? Harry nodded slowly. And? Harry handed her the letter. Megan read it carefully. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes hardened slightly. So that's their answer. Harry sighed. Yes. She placed the letter down. Well, she said firmly, then we deal with it ourselves. The following days were filled with urgent meetings: financial advisors, lawyers, business strategists, everyone searching for ways to restructure the debt. Harry listened as the experts explained the options: asset sales, new partnerships, debt consolidation. But every solution required time and money. Back in London, William thought often about the situation. He didn't celebrate his father's decision, but he understood it. The monarchy needed stability. Still, he wondered whether Harry would find a way forward. Despite everything that had happened between them, William hoped he would, because deep down, he still believed his brother could rebuild his life. Late one evening, Charles stood alone in his study. The rain had finally stopped. He looked down at a photograph on his desk. It showed two young boys, William and Harry, laughing together years ago. Charles sighed softly. Find your way, my son, he whispered, because sometimes the hardest lesson a parent can teach is letting a child face the consequences of their own choices. The sun rose slowly over Montecito, casting a golden light across the quiet hillside neighborhood where Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, had built their life far away from the royal palaces of Britain. But inside their sprawling home, the atmosphere was far from peaceful. On the large dining table sat a thick stack of documents: loan agreements, legal notices, investment statements. Each one carried the same reminder: $59 million in debt. Harry sat staring at the papers, his hands clasped together. For the first time since leaving royal life, he felt the weight of something he had never truly experienced before: financial pressure, real pressure. Across the room, Megan was on the phone with a financial consultant. Yes, she said firmly, we've already liquidated the secondary properties and the investment accounts. She listened for a moment. No, that won't be enough. When she hung up, the silence between them felt heavy. Harry finally spoke. So, what's the verdict? Megan exhaled slowly. We have to rebuild everything. For years, Harry had believed independence meant freedom: freedom from royal expectations, freedom from palace rules, freedom from the centuries old traditions surrounding Buckingham Palace and the monarchy. But freedom also came with something else: responsibility. And now that responsibility had a price tag: $59 million. Harry ran a hand through his hair. I never imagined things would end up like this. Megan looked at him carefully. We took risks, she said. Some worked, some didn't. Harry nodded slowly. But we'll fix it. Her voice carried determination. We have no other choice. Thousands of miles away, the atmosphere inside Clarence House was quiet but tense. King Charles III had received confirmation that his letter to Harry had been delivered. The message had been clear. The monarchy would not assume the financial burden. It had not been an easy decision. Charles stood near the window when Prince William entered the room. You heard from him? William asked. Charles shook his head. No. William nodded. He's probably trying to figure out his next move. Charles sighed softly. I hope he finds a way forward. Despite everything, Charles still worried about his younger son. Back in Montecito, Harry had begun meeting with advisors day and night. One proposal stood out: a major global speaking tour. Harry had always been passionate about mental health, veteran support, and leadership. The idea was simple: travel internationally, speak at high profile conferences, partner with global organizations. If successful, the tour could generate millions. Harry leaned back in his chair after hearing the proposal. You really think people would pay to hear me speak? The consultant smiled. You'd be surprised. While Harry considered the speaking tour, Meghan was already planning something even bigger. She opened her laptop and showed Harry a detailed presentation. What's this? He asked. Our comeback, Meghan replied. She explained her plan: a new lifestyle brand, digital media content, documentary productions, high end partnerships with global companies. It's ambitious, Harry admitted. Meghan smiled slightly. Ambition is the only way out of this. Meanwhile, in Britain, William found himself thinking about Harry more than he expected. Late one evening inside Kensington Palace, he stood on the balcony overlooking the quiet palace gardens. He remembered their childhood, running through palace corridors, playing football in the gardens, laughing without the burden of adulthood. Now everything had changed. William turned to his private secretary. Find a discreet way to contact him. The secretary looked surprised. Sir? William nodded. I'm not calling as the Prince of Wales. He paused. I'm calling as his brother. 3 days later, Harry's phone rang late at night. The number was unfamiliar. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Hello? There was a brief pause, then a voice he hadn't heard privately in years. Harry! Harry froze. William? Yes. For a moment, neither brother spoke. Years of tension hung between them. Finally, William said quietly, I heard about the financial situation. Harry sighed. Yeah. William continued carefully. I can't fix it for you. I know, Harry replied, but I wanted you to know. I hope you get through it. Harry leaned back in his chair. The words were simple, but they meant more than he expected. Thanks, Harry said quietly. After the call ended, Harry sat alone for several minutes. Something inside him had shifted. The situation hadn't changed. The debt was still there. The pressure remained enormous. But hearing his brother's voice reminded him of something important. He wasn't completely alone. Harry stood and walked into the next room where Meghan was reviewing financial reports. Good news? She asked. Harry shook his head. Not exactly. He paused. But I'm ready to fight this. Megan looked up. That's what I like to hear. Within weeks, the plan began moving forward. Harry's speaking tour was announced: international events, leadership conferences, major charity gatherings. At the same time, Megan quietly began negotiating the launch of her new brand. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since the crisis began, the future no longer felt impossible. Late one evening in London, Charles received a brief update from his advisors. Harry had started rebuilding. The news made him smile faintly. Standing alone in his study at Buckingham Palace, he looked at a photograph of both his sons. Perhaps hardship will lead to wisdom, he murmured. Because sometimes the greatest lessons come not from success, but from struggle. The early morning fog drifted across the quiet hills of Montecito, wrapping the luxury estates in a pale gray silence. Inside their sprawling home, Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, sat alone on the terrace. A cup of coffee rested beside him, long since gone cold. In front of him lay the same financial summary he had studied for weeks: $59 million. The number had become impossible to ignore. It followed him everywhere, every meeting, every phone call, every moment of quiet reflection. But today felt different because the first steps toward solving the crisis had finally begun. Only days after Harry's global speaking tour was announced, headlines exploded across international news outlets. Speculation about his financial troubles spread rapidly. Some commentators sympathized, others criticized. Many questioned how someone born into royal privilege could face such staggering debt. Across Britain, television panels debated the situation endlessly. Inside Buckingham Palace, palace officials monitored the reaction carefully. The monarchy had chosen not to intervene, but public interest in the story continued growing. In a quiet study lined with books and historical portraits, King Charles III reviewed the latest media briefings. A senior advisor stood nearby. The situation is dominating international coverage, the advisor explained. Charles nodded slowly. I expected that. He placed the report on his desk. But we must remain separate from it. The advisor hesitated before speaking again. Some commentators are suggesting the monarchy abandoned him. Charles sighed softly. That narrative was inevitable. He stood and walked toward the window. But rescuing him would have created a much larger crisis. The monarchy depended on public trust, and public trust demanded accountability, even within the royal family. Back in Montecito, Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, was moving quickly. While Harry focused on rebuilding his reputation through public speaking, Meghan had begun constructing an entirely new business strategy. Her office was filled with advisors and marketing consultants. A large digital screen displayed her newest project, a luxury lifestyle brand aimed at international audiences, wellness, home design, fashion collaborations, documentary content. Meghan spoke confidently to the room. We're not just recovering, we're reinventing. One advisor asked cautiously, do you think the public will respond positively after the recent headlines? Meghan didn't hesitate. They always respond to authenticity. She smiled slightly. And resilience. 2 weeks later, Harry stepped onto the stage at a leadership conference in New York. Hundreds of attendees filled the auditorium. The atmosphere was tense with curiosity. Everyone knew about the financial crisis. Everyone wondered if he would address it. Harry stood at the podium and looked across the audience. Then he began speaking. Life sometimes forces you to confront uncomfortable truths. The room grew silent. I grew up surrounded by privilege. He paused briefly. But privilege doesn't protect you from mistakes. The audience listened intently. Harry continued. Over the past few months, I've faced some difficult financial realities. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Few expected such honesty. But I've also learned something important, Harry said. Failure can either break you or teach you. The audience erupted into applause. For the first time since the crisis began, Harry felt something powerful: momentum. Across the Atlantic, Prince William watched a recording of the speech inside Kensington Palace. When Harry finished speaking, William leaned back thoughtfully. That was surprisingly honest, he said. His private secretary nodded. The public reaction has been very positive. William nodded slowly. Good. He didn't say it out loud, but part of him felt relieved, because despite their differences, he still wanted his brother to succeed. A week later, something unexpected happened. Harry received a call from an international business group. The company had been impressed by his speech and by the public reaction to it. They wanted to partner with him, a global series of mental health and leadership conferences, corporate sponsorship, large scale charitable fundraising. The financial potential was enormous. Harry stared at the proposal in disbelief. This could cover half the debt, he said quietly. His advisor nodded. And possibly more if the events succeed. At the same time, Meghan's lifestyle brand officially launched online. Within hours, the website traffic surged beyond expectations. Supporters praised her determination. Critics debated the timing, but the brand generated immediate global attention. Meghan reviewed the sales reports late that night. This is working, she said. Harry smiled. For the first time in months, it actually feels like it. In London, Charles received the latest financial report about Harry's progress: the speaking tour, the new partnerships, the business ventures. The numbers suggested something surprising. Harry might actually recover. Charles allowed himself a small smile. Standing in the quiet halls of Buckingham Palace, he looked once more at the photograph of his two sons as children. Perhaps he's finding his way after all, he murmured. Late one evening, William sent Harry a brief message, not through palace channels, not through advisors, just a simple text. I watched your speech. Well done. Harry stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed a reply. Thanks. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a beginning. The debt was still enormous. The pressure remained intense, but the path forward was finally visible. Harry stood on the Montecito terrace once again, watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. Months earlier, the future had felt uncertain. Now, slowly, determination replaced fear, because sometimes the hardest challenges reveal the strength people never knew they had. And Harry intended to prove something, not to the monarchy, not to the media, but to himself, that he could rebuild his life on his own terms. Subscribers, my channel.